Admiral Vextar's 6 arms trembled as he stared at the tactical display aboard the Imperial Dreadnought Extinction's Edge. The massive Zephyrian had commanded fleets for 3 centuries, had witnessed the fall of 17 civilizations, and had personally overseen the glassing of 43 worlds. Nothing in the galaxy should have made him nervous anymore. Yet here he was, mandibles clicking anxiously as he studied the impossible readings on his screens. The object drifting through the Kepler Nebula defied every known law of physics, every principle of starship design that the Galactic Empire had established over its 10,000-year reign. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of his own dreadnought, but, according to his sensors, it was completely hollow. The hull appeared to be constructed from some unknown metal that absorbed nearly all scanning attempts, returning only fragmentary data that made no sense. Communications Officer Zilhan, have you managed to establish contact with the vessel? Admiral Vextar's voice carried the authoritative rumble that had cowed 1,000 species into submission. The insectoid communications officer's compound eyes flickered nervously. No response to any of our standard hails, Admiral. We've tried every known galactic language, every frequency, even ancient protocols from the First Empire. The vessel remains completely silent. Fleet Captain Mordun, a hulking reptilian whose scales bore the scars of countless battles, stepped forward from his position at the weapons console. Admiral, with respect, perhaps silence is the appropriate response when faced with Imperial might. This could be some primitive species that doesn't understand they are in the presence of their betters. Admiral Vextar's laugh was devoid of humor. Primitive? Captain, look at your readings again. That vessel is generating an energy signature that our instruments can barely detect, let alone analyze. The hull composition is unknown to our databases. Most concerning of all, it appears to be running completely silent. No engine emissions, no heat signature, no electromagnetic radiation of any kind. It's clearly under intelligent control. The bridge fell silent except for the soft humming of the ship's systems. Every officer present understood the implications. In 10,000 years of expansion, the Galactic Empire had encountered thousands of species. Some had been advanced enough to provide brief resistance before being conquered and absorbed. Others had been so primitive they barely qualified as sentient. But none, absolutely none, had possessed technology that the Empire couldn't immediately understand and categorize. Science Officer Velian, her crystalline form refracting the bridge's lights into prismatic patterns, materialized near the Admiral's command throne. As one of the Empire's most brilliant xenoarchaeologists, she had been specially assigned to this patrol specifically because of rumors about ancient artifacts in this sector. Admiral, her voice resonated with harmonic frequencies that translated as barely controlled excitement. I've been analyzing the vessel's configuration. The design principles are unlike anything in our records. Look at these structural patterns. The main display shifted to show a detailed scan of the mysterious ship's exterior. What they could see was breathtaking, elegant curves that seemed to flow like liquid metal, but with an underlying geometric precision that spoke of incredibly advanced engineering. Strange protrusions jutted from the hull at seemingly random intervals, but careful analysis revealed they were positioned according to some complex mathematical principle that the Empire's computers couldn't decipher. The proportions are all wrong, Velian continued, her excitement building. No known species builds vessels like this. The engineering tolerances are impossibly tight. Our best shipyards couldn't construct something with this level of precision, even if we had the blueprints. Admiral Vextar felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. In all his years of service, he had never encountered anything that made him question the Empire's technological supremacy. They were the inheritors of the ancient progenitors, masters of technologies that had dominated the galaxy since before most current species had evolved. Yet this vessel suggested the existence of someone, or something, that might actually be their equal. Tactical analysis, Captain Mordun. Could we disable or capture this vessel if necessary? The reptilian captain's claws danced across his console, running combat simulations. After several minutes, his expression grew increasingly troubled. Admiral, the tactical computers are having difficulty generating reliable projections. The vessel's hull appears to be constructed from materials that would require our most powerful weapons to penetrate. More concerning, We have no idea what defensive capabilities it might possess. What about its weapons systems? That's just it, sir. We can't detect any obvious weapons. No missile pods, no energy cannons, no torpedo tubes. Either they're incredibly well hidden, or this vessel uses completely unknown offensive technologies. Admiral Vextar's primary arms clenched into fists. The thought that some unknown species might possess military technology superior to the Empire's was almost unthinkable. The Empire's dominance was built on the simple principle that they possessed the most advanced weapons and defenses in the galaxy. If that assumption proved false, Sir, Communications Officer Zilhan's voice interrupted his dark thoughts. We're receiving a transmission from Imperial Command. Fleet Admiral Keth Moran wants a full report on our contact with the unknown vessel. Vextar's mandibles clicked in annoyance. Of course, headquarters had been monitoring their transmissions. The Empire's paranoia about potential threats meant that all patrol ships maintained constant communication links with command. He would have to be very careful about how he phrased his report. Tell the Fleet Admiral that we've encountered a vessel of unknown origin and are conducting standard first contact protocols, he finally replied. Request permission to maintain observation and attempt communication. As Zilhan relayed the message, Vextar continued studying the mysterious ship. Something about its design nagged at him, a familiarity that he couldn't quite place. Then it hit him. The proportions, the flowing lines, the organic curves mixed with precise engineering. It reminded him of something from the restricted archives, something from the very earliest records of the Empire's expansion. Velian, he called to the science officer, access the classified xenological databases. Search for any references to species designation. Human. The crystalline being's form flickered with surprise. Admiral, those files are sealed under Imperial Security Protocol Omega. I would need authorization from the High Council itself to, then, get it, Vextar interrupted, his voice carrying deadly seriousness. I have a feeling that what we're looking at might be related to the Forbidden Zones. A collective shudder ran through the bridge crew. Every officer in the Imperial fleet knew about the Forbidden Zones, vast regions of space that were strictly off-limits to all Imperial ships. The official explanation was that these areas contained dangerous spatial anomalies or unstable stellar phenomena. But rumors persisted among the fleet that the real reason was something far more troubling. Sir, Velian's voice had lost all trace of excitement, replaced by growing dread. If this vessel is related to the Forbidden Zones, then we may be dealing with something far beyond our current mission parameters. Admiral Vextar nodded grimly. Precisely why we need those files. The Empire has been very careful to keep certain information restricted, but if we're facing a potential threat from that direction, then we need to know what we're dealing with. As if responding to their conversation, the mysterious vessel suddenly began to move. It wasn't the gradual acceleration of conventional engines, but an instantaneous transition from motionless to incredible velocity. The ship moved through space with an elegance that defied physics, changing direction without any visible maneuvering thrusters, accelerating without any detectable engine emissions. By the progenitors, Captain Mordun whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror. Nothing moves like that. Nothing can move like that. The vessel performed a series of maneuvers that should have been impossible. It shifted through dimensions that the Imperial sensors couldn't fully track, appearing to exist in multiple locations simultaneously before resolving back into normal space. Then, as suddenly as it had begun moving, it stopped directly between the Imperial fleet and the system's primary star. Admiral, Zilhan's voice was barely above a whisper. We're receiving a transmission from the unknown vessel. Put it through. The bridge speakers crackled to life, but instead of words, they heard something that made every officer present freeze in terror. It was music, complex, haunting melodies that seemed to speak directly to something deep in their genetic memory. But underneath the music was something else, the sound of voices speaking in a language that predated the Empire itself. As the transmission continued, Velian worked frantically at her console, running the audio through every linguistic analysis program in the Imperial database. Slowly, fragments began to resolve into recognizable concepts, though the meaning was almost too terrifying to contemplate. Admiral, she said, her crystalline form now flickering with patterns of deep red that indicated extreme distress. I'm getting partial translations. The language appears to be an archaic form of Imperial Common. But that's impossible. Imperial Common was created by the Empire. No species should know it except those we've conquered and integrated. What are they saying? Velian's form shimmered as she processed more of the transmission. It's a greeting. They're welcoming us to their space and asking about our intentions. But, Admiral, they're using formal diplomatic protocols that haven't been employed by the Empire in over 8,000 years. Protocols that are supposed to be lost to history. The implications were staggering. Either this unknown species had somehow obtained access to the Empire's most classified historical records, or they had been present during the Empire's early expansion, which according to all official histories was impossible. Admiral Vextar stared at the magnificent vessel hanging motionless before his fleet, and, for the first time in his long military career, he wondered if the Galactic Empire had finally encountered something that might challenge their assumption of absolute supremacy. The vessel was clearly waiting for a response, but how did one respond to the impossible? In the depths of space, surrounded by the awesome might of an Imperial fleet, a single mysterious ship had managed to shake the foundations of everything the Empire believed about its place in the universe. And, somewhere in the back of Admiral Vextar's mind, a terrible suspicion was beginning to form about exactly what kind of species could construct such a vessel. The thought that kept returning to him, despite all logic and reason, was both simple and terrifying. What if the rumors about humanity were actually true? Fleet Admiral Keth Moran paced the length of his command chamber aboard the Imperial capital ship Sovereign's Wrath, his massive form casting shadows across the holographic displays that filled the room. As Supreme Commander of the Empire's Third Fleet, he had crushed rebellions on 17 worlds and had personally overseen the integration of 43 species into Imperial society. His strategic brilliance was legendary, his tactical innovations studied in military academies across the galaxy. But the report from Admiral Vextar had shaken him to his very core. The sealed chamber around him contained the Empire's most classified information, data that even most High Council members weren't permitted to access. Ancient files from the Empire's earliest days, when it was still expanding beyond its home systems and encountering the galaxy's diverse species for the first time. Most of these records have been officially classified as historical curiosities, but Keth Moran knew better. He knew about the Forbidden Zones. More importantly, he knew why they were truly forbidden. The holographic display before him showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, with Imperial territory marked in brilliant gold. Scattered throughout the display were several regions marked in deep red, areas that no Imperial ship was permitted to enter under any circumstances. The official explanation cited dangerous spatial anomalies, but the real truth was far more disturbing. Those zones were where humanity lived. Keth Moran activated his private communication array and established a direct, encrypted link to the High Council chambers on the Imperial homeworld. Within moments, the stern face of High Counselor Zekthal appeared in the display, his ancient features carved from living stone, eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. Fleet Admiral, Zekthal's voice carried the weight of millennia. I trust you have good reason for invoking Emergency Protocol 7. High Counselor, we may have a situation. One of my patrol fleets has encountered an unidentified vessel in the Kepler Nebula. The ship's technology appears to be beyond our current understanding. The High Counselor's expression didn't change, but Keth Moran noticed the slight tightening around his ancient eyes. Describe this vessel. Keth Moran transmitted Admiral Vextar's report, watching as Zekthal's face grew increasingly grave. When the transmission ended, the High Counselor was silent for several long minutes, his stone features completely motionless. Fleet Admiral, Zekthal finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. You are to implement Containment Protocol Alpha immediately. No information about this encounter is to be shared beyond your current command staff. And, under no circumstances are your ships to engage this vessel unless directly attacked. High Counselor, with respect, my officers are asking questions. Admiral Vextar has already requested access to the restricted archives. If this vessel represents a potential threat to the Empire, the threat, Zekthal interrupted, is not what you think it is. The danger lies not in what this species might do to us, but in what our own people might do if they learn the truth. Keth Moran felt his blood freeze. The truth about what? High Counselor, about why we really stopped expanding. The communication link went silent for several seconds before Zekthul continued, his voice heavy with the burden of ancient secrets. 10,000 years ago, when the Empire was young and ambitious, we believed ourselves to be the galaxy's destined rulers. We had inherited the technology of the progenitors, wielded weapons that could crack planets, commanded fleets that blocked out stars. We swept across the galaxy, conquering everything in our path. Species that resisted were destroyed. Those that submitted were integrated. It was a time of glory and expansion that seemed destined to continue forever. The holographic display shifted, showing ancient star charts from the Empire's early expansion. Keth Moran could see the steady progression of Imperial territory spreading outward from their homeworld like an unstoppable tide. Then, we encountered them, Zekthul continued, a species that called themselves humans. They inhabited a relatively small region of space, perhaps a few hundred systems at most. By all our calculations, they should have been easy to conquer. They had no great fleets, no planet-killing weapons, no obvious technological advantages. They seemed to be just another primitive species that would fall before Imperial might. What happened? We attacked their outer colonies first, expecting swift victory. The first few engagements went as predicted. Their ships were destroyed, their colonies surrendered. But instead of breaking their spirit, each defeat seemed to make them stronger, more determined, more dangerous. The star charts changed, showing the progression of the war. At first, Imperial Green advanced steadily into human space. Then the advance slowed, stopped, and then impossibly began to retreat. They didn't fight the way other species fought. Zekthul's voice grew distant, as if he was recalling memories from his own distant past. Other races would surrender when faced with impossible odds. Humans would find ways to make the impossible possible. They adapted to our tactics faster than we thought possible. They turned our own weapons against us. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to learn from defeat in ways that made them stronger. Keth Moran studied the tactical displays with growing amazement. The human territories showed a pattern of resistance unlike anything in Imperial history. Where other species had collapsed under sustained assault, humanity had somehow managed to not just survive, but to push back. The war lasted 3 centuries, Zekthul continued. 3 centuries in which a species that should have been conquered in 3 months managed to stop the expansion of the greatest empire in galactic history. By the end, we weren't advancing anymore. We were fighting just to hold the territory we had already claimed. How did it end? With a treaty that the High Council has kept secret ever since. Humanity agreed to remain within their designated space, and we agreed to mark their territories as forbidden zones. No Imperial ships would enter human space, and humans would not expand beyond their current borders. Keth Moran stared at the display in shock. You mean they're still out there? After all this time? Not just still out there, Zekthul replied grimly. According to our long-range monitoring stations, they've continued to develop their technology. The ship your patrol encountered is probably just a scout vessel, but it represents 10,000 years of advancement by a species that was already proving troublesome when we first met them. The implications were staggering. The Galactic Empire, which prided itself on being the supreme civilization in the galaxy, had essentially admitted defeat to a species that most Imperial citizens had never heard of. More than that, they had spent 10 millennia pretending that this defeat had never happened. High Counselor, why has this information been kept secret? Surely the Empire's citizens have a right to know about other advanced civilizations. Zekthul's laugh was bitter. Because knowledge of humanity's existence would shatter the Empire's fundamental mythology. Our entire governmental structure is based on the principle that we are the galaxy's natural rulers, inheritors of the progenitor's legacy. If our citizens learned that there was another species, one that had successfully resisted Imperial conquest, it would call into question everything the Empire stands for. The communication display showed new data streaming in from Admiral Vextar's fleet. The human vessel was still maintaining its position, apparently waiting for some kind of response. More concerning, additional ships were beginning to appear at the edge of sensor range. Not human vessels, but Imperial patrol ships that had been drawn to investigate the unusual communications traffic. Fleet Admiral Zekthal's voice carried new urgency. How many of your officers know about this encounter? The bridge crew of Admiral Vextar's flagship, plus possibly some personnel on the other ships in his patrol group. Maybe 30 individuals total. That's 30 too many. You need to contain the situation immediately. Transfer those personnel to secure facilities under medical quarantine protocols. The official story is that they were exposed to an unknown pathogen during routine deep space operations. Keth Moran felt sick. High Counselor, you're asking me to imprison my own officers to protect a lie. I'm asking you to protect the stability of an empire that governs 7,000 species across half the galaxy, Zekthal replied sharply. The truth about humanity isn't just dangerous because of what they might do. It's dangerous because of how our own people might react. Do you want to be responsible for civil wars across 100 worlds? For the collapse of the only governmental structure that has maintained galactic peace for 10,000 years? The weight of the decision pressed down on Keth Moran like a physical force. Everything he had believed about the Empire, about its rightful place in the galaxy, was crumbling around him. But he was also a pragmatist who understood the consequences of social upheaval on a galactic scale. What about the human vessel? It's clearly expecting some kind of response. Send a diplomatic courier with standard peaceful intentions protocols. Make it clear that this is Imperial space, but don't be aggressive about it. The last thing we want is to provoke an incident that might bring more of their ships into our territory. As Zekthal's image faded from the display, Keth Moran found himself alone with the most dangerous secret in Imperial history. Somewhere in the Kepler Nebula, a human ship was waiting for contact with representatives of an empire that had spent 10 millennia pretending humanity didn't exist. Meanwhile, aboard the human vessel Wanderer, Captain Sarah Chun studied the Imperial fleet with mild curiosity. The alien ships were certainly impressive, massive, heavily armed, and displaying the kind of technological sophistication that suggested a mature, spacefaring civilization. Their communications had been polite, but cautious, exactly what she would expect from first contact with an unknown species. Of course, humanity had known about the Galactic Empire for quite some time. 10,000 years was more than enough time to establish a comprehensive intelligence network. The Empire's activities were monitored, their expansion tracked, their technological development assessed. The periodic updates from human deep space reconnaissance had painted a picture of a civilization that was powerful, but ultimately predictable. What the Empire didn't realize was that their forbidden zones weren't just barriers keeping humans contained. They were observation posts that allowed humanity to study Imperial civilization while remaining completely hidden. Every major Imperial technological advance, every significant political development, every military innovation had been carefully cataloged and analyzed. And now, for the first time in 10,000 years, a human ship had deliberately revealed itself to Imperial forces. Captain Chun smiled as she thought about the panic this encounter was probably causing in Imperial command centers across their territory. The galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the Wanderer, her hands clasped behind her back as she watched the Imperial fleet maintain their cautious distance. The human vessel had been drifting in the Kepler Nebula for 6 hours now, and the alien ships showed no signs of making the first move. Their formation was textbook defensive. Clearly, they were unsure whether her ship represented a threat or an opportunity. She understood their confusion. The Wanderer was designed to be deliberately mysterious to outside observers. Its hull was constructed from metamaterials that could selectively absorb or reflect sensor scans, making it appear far more advanced than it actually was. The ship's true capabilities were impressive enough without the need for deception, but first contact protocols required a careful balance between showing strength and avoiding unnecessary provocation. Captain Lieutenant Commander Zhang turned from the communication station. We're receiving another transmission from the Imperial fleet. Same diplomatic protocols as before, but the encryption patterns suggest it's coming from a different ship this time. Put it through the linguistic analyzer, Chen replied. Let's see what they're really trying to say. The bridge speakers filled with the strange, musical language of the Imperial fleet. After 10,000 years of intelligence gathering, humanity had developed comprehensive databases of most imperial languages and dialects. The translation algorithms were sophisticated enough to catch not just the literal meaning of words, but the cultural subtleties and emotional undertones that could make the difference between peaceful contact and interstellar war. They're requesting permission to send a diplomatic courier, Zhang reported after the analysis completed. Standard peaceful intentions, but there's an underlying tension in the transmission that suggests they're considerably more worried about this encounter than they're letting on. Chen nodded. This was proceeding exactly as the strategists back home had predicted. The Imperial response pattern was consistent with their documented behavior when encountering unknown but potentially dangerous civilizations. Cautious, diplomatic, but with clear undertones of military preparedness. Dr. Martinez, Chun called to the ship's xenocultural specialist. How long do we wait before responding? I don't want to seem too eager, but I also don't want to make them nervous enough to do something stupid. Elena Martinez was one of humanity's foremost experts on imperial psychology, having spent decades studying intercepted communications and cultural artifacts. Her analysis had been instrumental in developing the current first contact protocols. Based on their formation patterns and communication intervals, I'd say they're expecting a response within the next hour, Martinez replied. Imperial military doctrine emphasizes rapid decision-making, so a longer delay might be interpreted as either technological problems or deliberate provocation. Chen considered this. The Wanderer's mission was ostensibly one of peaceful exploration, but its real purpose was far more complex. After 10 millennia of isolation, humanity had finally decided it was time to test the waters with their old adversaries. The question wasn't whether humans could still defend themselves against imperial aggression. Technological advances over the past 10,000 years had made that outcome certain. The real question was whether the Empire had evolved enough politically to handle the knowledge that they weren't alone at the top of the galactic hierarchy. Commander Torres, Chen addressed her tactical officer. What's your assessment of their fleet composition? Miguel Torres had been studying imperial military technology for most of his career. His job was to ensure that humanity's first open contact in 10,000 years didn't accidentally start a war that nobody really wanted. Standard patrol formation, Torres replied, pulling up tactical displays on the main screen. 1 heavy cruiser, 3 destroyers, and 2 scout ships. Fairly typical for deep space operations. Their weapons are power down, but ready, shields at standard operational levels. They're prepared for trouble, but not actively seeking it. Any sign they've recognized our ship's origins? Hard to say. Their scanning patterns suggest they're having difficulty analyzing our hull composition, which is exactly what we want. But there's been an unusual amount of encrypted communication traffic between their ships and what appears to be a command vessel outside the immediate area. Chen frowned. That suggested the Imperial command structure was taking this encounter very seriously indeed. Probably more seriously than a simple first contact with an unknown species would normally warrant. Dr. Martinez, what are the chances they figure out who we are? The xenocultural specialist considered the question carefully. Well, Captain, the Imperial military maintains extensive historical archives. If their commanders have access to classified records from the early expansion period, they might have enough information to make educated guesses. The real question is whether they'd be willing to act on those guesses. Chun walked to the forward observation port and stared out at the Imperial ships. They were beautiful in their own way, sleek, deadly, and bearing the distinctive architectural styles of dozens of different species that had been absorbed into the Empire over the millennia. Each ship told the story of conquered civilizations, their technologies and designs integrated into the Imperial military machine. It was a reminder of why humanity had chosen isolation 10,000 years ago. The Empire's approach to galactic governance was effective, but it came at the cost of cultural diversity. Species that joined the Empire, willingly or otherwise, gradually lost their distinctive identities, becoming part of a homogeneous imperial culture that valued efficiency over individual expression. Humanity had chosen a different path. Rather than trying to build a galactic empire, they had focused on developing their own civilization to its fullest potential. The results spoke for themselves. While the empire had spread across thousands of worlds, humans had learned to build better worlds. While the Empire had absorbed thousands of species, humans had learned to enhance themselves. While the Empire had conquered space, humans had learned to transcend it. Captain, Zhang's voice interrupted her thoughts. We're receiving a priority transmission from home base. Admiral Nakamura wants a status report. Shin smiled. Admiral Keiko Nakamura was the strategic architect behind humanity's current approach to galactic relations. A brilliant tactician with decades of experience in long-range planning, she had been responsible for developing the protocols that were currently being tested in this first contact scenario. Put the Admiral through on secure Channel 7. The main display shimmered and resolved into the image of Admiral Nakamura sitting in her command center on Luna Base. The orbital facility had served as humanity's primary military headquarters for the past 3,000 years, a testament to their preference for developing existing resources rather than constantly expanding to new territories. Captain Chun, Nakamura's voice carried across the light years with crystal clarity. I trust your encounter with our Imperial friends is proceeding according to plan? So far, Admiral, they're being appropriately cautious, but they haven't shown any signs of aggression. I'm preparing to allow their diplomatic courier to approach our ship. Good. Remember, Captain, this isn't just about establishing communication. We need to assess whether the Empire has evolved politically over the past 10 millennia. Are they still the conquest-oriented civilization we knew, or have they developed more sophisticated approaches to interspecies relations? Shin nodded. This was the crucial test. Humanity's isolation hadn't been permanent. It had always been intended as a temporary measure while they developed the capabilities necessary to interact with the Empire as equals rather than subjects. The question was whether the Empire had developed enough politically to handle that kind of relationship. What's our fallback position if this doesn't go well? Same as always, Nakamura replied with a slight smile. Polite withdrawal and another few thousand years of patient observation. We're in no hurry, Captain. Let them set the pace. As the transmission ended, Shin reflected on the profound difference between human and imperial approaches to time. The Empire thought in terms of immediate conquest and rapid expansion. Humanity had learned to think in geological time frames, making plans that might take millennia to fully develop. Captain, Dr. Martinez approached with a tablet containing analysis reports. I've been reviewing the linguistic patterns in their communications. There's something interesting here. What kind of interesting? They're using formal diplomatic protocols that predate most of their current governmental structure. The language patterns suggest they're drawing on very old precedents, possibly from their early expansion period. Shin raised an eyebrow. You mean they might actually remember us? It's possible. The Imperial military maintains extensive archives, and first contact with humanity would have been a significant enough event to warrant detailed record-keeping. If their current commanders have access to those records, then they know exactly what they're dealing with, Shin finished. Which means this encounter just became much more interesting. She turned back to the observation port, studying the Imperial fleet with new eyes. If they really did know about humanity's history with the Empire, then this wasn't just a first contact scenario. It was a reunion between old adversaries who had spent 10,000 years wondering about each other. Commander Zhang, she called, prepare our response to their diplomatic request. Standard peaceful intentions, but add the formal friendship protocols from the early Imperial period. If they know who we are, let's see how they react to being reminded of our shared history. As the communications array powered up to send humanity's first official message to the Galactic Empire in 10 millennia, Chen couldn't help but smile. Somewhere in the Imperial command structure, admirals and counselors were probably having very serious discussions about how to handle the return of species they thought they'd successfully contained. The galaxy was about to become a much more complicated place, and for the first time in centuries, Chen found herself genuinely curious about how it would all turn out. Meanwhile, aboard the Imperial dreadnought, Admiral Vextar was receiving the most disturbing news of his long career. The response from the mysterious vessel had included linguistic protocols that hadn't been used by the Empire in over 8,000 years, protocols that were only documented in the most classified historical archives, which meant that whoever was aboard that ship had either infiltrated the Empire's most secure databases, or they had been present when those protocols were first developed. And if Admiral Vextar's growing suspicions were correct, the second possibility was far more likely than the first. The Galactic Empire was about to rediscover that they weren't alone at the top of the galactic hierarchy after all. The Imperial High Council chamber on Zephyros Prime had not seen this level of emergency activity in over 2,000 years. Ancient counselors who rarely left their meditation chambers had been summoned from across the galaxy, their long-range transport ships arriving with unprecedented urgency. The massive circular chamber, carved from a single piece of crystallized starlight and capable of holding representatives from every major Imperial species, now contained only 13 figures, the most senior members of the Council, each carrying security clearances that allowed access to the Empire's deepest secrets. High Counselor Zekthal stood at the center of the chamber, his ancient stone features grim as he activated the holographic displays that surrounded the assembly. The information contained in these displays had not been reviewed by the full High Council in over 8 millennia, and for good reason. Some secrets were too dangerous to examine unless absolutely necessary. Honored counselors, his voice resonated through the chamber's acoustics. We face a situation that may require us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about our place in the galaxy. Counselor Velmeth, whose crystalline form had witnessed the rise and fall of 17 civilizations, spoke first. High Counselor, the preliminary reports we've received suggest contact with an unknown spacefaring species. While certainly significant, such encounters are not unprecedented in Imperial history. Under normal circumstances, you would be correct, Zekthal replied. However, these are not normal circumstances. The holographic displays shifted, showing detailed scans of the human vessel. Analysis of this ship's construction and technology suggests capabilities that match or exceed our own in several key areas. A collective murmur ran through the assembly. In 10,000 years of expansion, the Empire had never encountered another species with truly comparable technology. Advanced civilizations, certainly, some requiring significant military effort to conquer, but none that could be considered technological equals. Counselor Morcanis, whose insectoid form bore the ceremonial scars of the Hive Wars, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Surely our xenoarchaeology departments would have detected signs of such an advanced civilization during our expansion surveys. They did, Zekthal replied quietly. 10,000 years ago. The silence that followed was absolute. Several counselors exchanged glances that carried millennia of political understanding. They all knew that the Empire's official histories contained certain gaps, periods where records were incomplete or classified beyond normal access levels. But the implications of Zekthal's statement went far beyond simple historical revision. High Counselor. Counselor Asheran's voice carried the harmonic frequencies of her gaseous species. Are you suggesting that this contact represents a re-encounter rather than a first meeting? I am stating, not suggesting, that the vessel currently under observation by our Third Fleet belongs to a species known as humanity. A species with which the Empire signed a non-aggression treaty approximately 9,847 years ago. The reaction was immediate and intense. Several counselors rose from their positions, their various forms expressing shock and outrage in ways unique to their species. Others remained seated but activated personal communication devices, presumably to contact their respective governments with news of this revelation. Order! Zekthal's voice cut through the chaos. Before any of you make decisions that might destabilize the Empire, you will hear the complete historical record. The holographic displays changed, now showing star charts from the Empire's early expansion period. The steady progression of Imperial Green advancing across the galaxy was clearly visible, but several counselors noticed something they had never seen before. Areas where that advance had stopped, not due to natural barriers or hostile forces, but apparently by treaty arrangement. During our initial expansion phase, Zekthal continued, Imperial forces encountered human civilization in what we now designate as the Forbidden Zones. Initial contact proceeded according to standard conquest protocols. Human resistance was expected to collapse within months, possibly weeks. The star charts animated, showing the progression of what appeared to be a military campaign. At first, the pattern was familiar. Imperial forces advancing steadily, human territories shrinking under sustained assault. Then, something remarkable happened. The advance slowed, stopped, and began to reverse. Counselor Thekmal, whose species had joined the Empire during its middle expansion period, studied the displays with growing amazement. High Counselor, these tactical summaries suggest that humanity successfully resisted imperial conquest. How is that possible? Because, Zekthal replied grimly, they adapted to our methods faster than we could develop new ones. Every tactical innovation we employed was analyzed, understood, and countered within months. Every technological advantage we possessed was somehow neutralized or turned against us. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to become more dangerous with each defeat. New displays activated, showing detailed analysis of human technology and tactics from the ancient war. The information painted a picture of a species that approached conflict in ways that the Empire had never encountered before or since. Where other civilizations relied on superior numbers or advanced technology, humans had developed an approach to warfare that was simultaneously brutal and elegant, combining technological innovation with psychological insight in ways that proved devastatingly effective. The war lasted 3 centuries, Zekthal continued. 3 centuries during which the greatest military machine in galactic history was held to a stalemate by a species that controlled fewer than 1,000 star systems. By the end of the conflict, our military analysts had concluded that complete victory over humanity would require the total destruction of Imperial forces. Counselor Velmeth's crystalline form flickered with patterns that indicated deep shock. High Counselor, are you saying that the Empire was defeated? I am saying that the Empire chose to negotiate rather than face the possibility of mutual annihilation. The treaty established what we now call the Forbidden Zones, regions of space where humanity would remain, in exchange for an end to hostilities and imperial agreement not to interfere with human development. The political implications were staggering. Every counselor present understood that the Empire's governmental legitimacy was based on the principle of inevitable imperial supremacy. The knowledge that there was another civilization that had successfully resisted conquest would undermine the fundamental mythology that held the Empire together. What are the treaty terms? Counselor Morcanis asked. Surely there were provisions for ongoing contact. The treaty established a complete separation. No Imperial ships in human space. No human ships in Imperial space. For 10,000 years, both sides have honored these agreements. Until now, Counselor Ashtaran observed. Until now, Zekthal agreed. Which brings us to the current crisis. A human vessel has deliberately revealed itself to Imperial forces, using diplomatic protocols that suggest they want to re-establish contact. The question facing this council is how to respond. Counselor Thekmal rose from his position, his reptilian features troubled. High Counselor, with respect, the Empire has changed significantly over the past 10 millennia. We've integrated hundreds of new species, developed advanced technologies, refined our governmental systems. Surely humanity cannot pose the same threat they once did. Zekthal's laugh was devoid of humor. Counselor, if humanity has changed as much as we have over the past 10,000 years, they may pose a far greater threat now than they ever did before. The holographic displays shifted again, now showing long-range sensor data from monitoring stations positioned near the Forbidden Zones. The information was fragmentary and incomplete, but what it revealed was deeply disturbing. Energy signatures that defied analysis, construction projects on a scale that dwarfed anything in Imperial space, and technology that appeared to violate several fundamental laws of physics. Our intelligence suggests that humanity has not been idle during their isolation, Zekthal continued. They appear to have focused their efforts on technological and social development rather than territorial expansion. The vessel currently under observation by our fleet represents the tip of an iceberg that we cannot fully comprehend. Counselor Velmeth's form had stabilized into patterns of deep concern. What are our options? Limited, Zekthal replied. We can attempt to re-establish diplomatic relations, risking the possibility that humanity has developed beyond our ability to negotiate with them as equals. We can maintain the status quo and hope they return to their isolation, risking the possibility that they interpret our silence as hostility. Or we can attempt to force them back into isolation, risking a war that we may not be able to win. The chamber fell silent as each counselor contemplated the implications. For 10,000 years, the Galactic Empire had operated under the assumption that they were the galaxy's supreme civilization. The discovery that this assumption might be false threatened to undermine everything they had built. There is one additional factor to consider, Zekthal added quietly. The human vessel that made contact is not alone. New displays activated, showing sensor data from deep space monitoring stations across Imperial territory. The information was scattered and difficult to interpret, but a pattern was emerging. Unknown vessels have been detected at the edge of Imperial space in dozens of locations, all maintaining positions that would allow them to observe Imperial activities without being easily detected. How long have they been watching us? Counselor Morcanis asked, his mandibles clicking nervously. Unknown. Possibly for centuries. Possibly for millennia. The full implications of this revelation hit the Assembly like a physical blow. The Empire's security had been based on the assumption that their borders were impregnable, that their military movements were secret, that their technological development was unobserved. If humanity had been conducting surveillance operations for extended periods, then they possessed detailed knowledge of Imperial capabilities, strategies, and weaknesses. Honored counselors, Zekthal said formally, I call for an emergency vote on Resolution 77 Alpha. Full diplomatic engagement with humanity, with all attendant risks and opportunities. As the voting began, each counselor understood that they were making a decision that would reshape the galaxy. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Galactic Empire was about to discover whether they had evolved enough to coexist with their equals. Meanwhile, aboard the Wanderer, Captain Shun was receiving updates from human observation posts throughout Imperial space. The Empire's reaction to first contact had been exactly as predicted, cautious, politically complex, and deeply concerned about the implications for their governmental stability. What the Empire didn't yet realize was that this contact wasn't a random encounter. It was the beginning of humanity's carefully planned reintegration with galactic civilization, a process that had been in development for over 1,000 years. The galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place indeed. Ambassador Lyra Vasquez stepped through the airlock of the Imperial diplomatic vessel Peaceful Endeavor and into a piece of living history. The human representative was tall by galactic standards, with the enhanced physical capabilities that marked her as a product of humanity's 10,000 years of genetic and technological development. But what struck Admiral Vextar most powerfully was her eyes, ancient, knowing, carrying the weight of civilizations that had risen and fallen while humanity watched from their self-imposed exile. The Imperial reception chamber had been hastily reconfigured to accommodate this unprecedented meeting. Representatives from 6 different species stood in carefully arranged positions, each chosen for their expertise in xenodiplomacy and their ability to handle classified information. The gravity had been adjusted to Earth normal, the atmosphere filtered to remove any trace compounds that might be harmful to human physiology, and the lighting calibrated to frequencies that human eyes found comfortable. Yet despite all these preparations, Admiral Vextar found himself wondering if they were adequate for dealing with a species that had successfully resisted the Empire at the height of its power. Admiral Vextar, Ambassador Vasquez spoke in perfect Imperial Common, her accent carrying traces of languages that predated the Empire itself. It is an honor to meet you. My government sends greetings and hopes that our renewed contact will be the beginning of a new era of cooperation between our peoples. The Admiral's mandibles clicked nervously as he considered his response. Everything about this encounter felt wrong, though not in any way he could precisely identify. The human ambassador was perfectly polite. Her words carried no hidden threats. Her demeanor suggested genuine interest in peaceful relations. Yet something about her presence made him deeply uncomfortable. Perhaps it was the way she moved, with a fluid grace that suggested perfect control over every muscle, every gesture calculated for maximum effect. Or perhaps it was the subtle confidence that radiated from her, the quiet assurance of someone who knew she held all the important cards in whatever game they were about to play. Ambassador Vasquez, he finally replied, welcome aboard. The Empire is curious about humanity's decision to re-establish contact after so many millennia of separation. Her smile was warm and completely terrifying. Admiral, I think it's time we discussed what has really changed in the galaxy during our absence. She activated a small device that projected a holographic display between them. The image showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, but not as any Imperial astronomer would recognize it. This map showed the true distribution of intelligent life. Not just the species that the Empire had conquered and cataloged, but dozens of civilizations that existed in the spaces between Imperial territories. You see, Admiral, Vasquez continued, the galaxy is much more crowded than your people realize. During the past 10,000 years, humanity has maintained diplomatic relations with over 200 species that exist completely outside Imperial knowledge. Some are primitive by your standards, others are rather more advanced. Admiral Vextar stared at the display in shock. The implications were staggering. If humanity had been conducting independent diplomacy with hundreds of species, then they possessed a network of information and alliances that dwarfed anything the Empire had imagined. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. "Because the galaxy is changing, Admiral. The model of a single dominant empire controlling vast territories through military force is becoming obsolete. The future belongs to civilizations that can build networks of cooperation and mutual benefit." Dr. Velian, the crystalline science officer who had been studying human technology for months, stepped forward. "Ambassador, our analysis of your vessel suggests technological capabilities that we cannot fully understand. How has humanity achieved such advancement?" Vasquez turned her attention to the science officer, her expression becoming thoughtful. "Dr. Velian, isn't it? I've read your published papers on xenoarchaeology. Quite impressive work." The fact that she knew about classified Imperial research sent another chill through the assembled officers. How much did humanity really know about Imperial activities? "To answer your question," Vasquez continued, "humanity has had the luxury of focusing our entire civilization on development rather than conquest. While the Empire was expanding across thousands of worlds, we were learning to build better worlds. While you were integrating new species, we were enhancing ourselves. While you were managing an empire, we were transcending the limitations that empires represent." She gestured, and the holographic display changed to show humanity's core territories. What the Imperial officers saw defied everything they thought they knew about civilization development. Instead of the sprawling networks of colonies and industrial worlds that characterized Imperial space, humanity appeared to have concentrated their efforts on a relatively small number of systems, each developed to an almost impossible degree of sophistication. "Dyson spheres," Admiral Vextar whispered, recognizing the massive structures surrounding several human stars. "You've built actual Dyson spheres." "Among other things," Vasquez replied casually. "When you have 10,000 years and don't waste energy on constant warfare, you can accomplish quite a lot." Fleet Captain Mordun, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. "Ambassador, what does humanity want from this contact? After 10 millennia of isolation, why reveal yourselves now?" The human ambassador's expression became serious. "Because, Captain, the galaxy is facing challenges that no single civilization can handle alone. The Void Hunters have returned." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Every Imperial officer present knew about the Void Hunters, though most considered them to be legends from the galaxy's ancient past. Entities from outside normal space-time that periodically emerged to consume entire star systems. They represented the closest thing to an existential threat that the galaxy had ever known. "The Void Hunters are myths," Dr. Velian said, though her crystalline form flickered with uncertainty. "Ancient stories created to explain natural phenomena that primitive civilizations couldn't understand." "I'm afraid not, Doctor," Vasquez replied gently. "Humanity has been monitoring deep space for evidence of their activities for the past 3,000 years. They're returning to this galaxy, and they'll arrive within the next 2 centuries. Admiral Vextar felt his world shift around him. "You have proof of this?" The holographic display changed again, now showing deep space sensor readings that documented gravitational anomalies and energy signatures consistent with Void Hunter activities. The data was comprehensive, detailed, and absolutely terrifying. "This is why humanity has chosen to re-establish contact," Vasquez explained. "Not because we need the Empire's help, but because the Empire and every other civilization in the galaxy will need ours. The coming conflict will require every advanced species working together if we're going to survive." The implications were overwhelming. Everything the Imperial officers thought they knew about galactic politics, about their civilization's place in the universe, about the fundamental nature of reality itself, was being rewritten in the space of a single conversation. "What are you proposing?" Admiral Vextar asked. "A new kind of alliance," Vasquez replied. "Not the absorption of smaller civilizations into imperial structure, but genuine cooperation between equals. Humanity is prepared to share our technological advances, our intelligence networks, and our military capabilities. In exchange, we want the Empire to begin transitioning away from the conquest model of governance towards something more sustainable." Fleet Captain Mordun's claws extended slightly. "You're asking us to abandon everything that makes the Empire what it is." "I'm asking you to evolve," Vasquez corrected. "The Empire's greatest strength has always been its ability to adapt and integrate new knowledge. What I'm offering is the greatest opportunity for adaptation in your history." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. "Admiral, your empire controls thousands of worlds and governs hundreds of species. But you've reached the limits of what that model can achieve. Further expansion requires ever-increasing military expenditure, ever more complex administrative systems, ever greater risks of internal rebellion. Meanwhile, you're surrounded by civilizations that you don't even know exist, facing threats that you're not prepared to handle." Admiral Vextar stared at the human ambassador, trying to process the enormity of what she was offering. Alliance with humanity would mean access to technologies that could revolutionize imperial civilization. But it would also mean acknowledging that the Empire was not, and had never been, the supreme power in the galaxy. "You're asking us to admit that we're not the greatest civilization in the galaxy." Vasquez smiled. "Admiral, I'm asking you to join the greatest civilization in the galaxy. There's a difference." As the meeting continued, Admiral Vextar found himself contemplating a future that he had never imagined possible. A galaxy where the Empire existed not as a conquering force, but as a partner in a vast network of cooperating civilizations, where humanity's technological advances could lift every species to new heights of development, where the threat of the Void Hunters could be met not by a single empire standing alone, but by the combined might of dozens of advanced civilizations working together. It was a beautiful vision. It was also the most terrifying proposition he had ever encountered, because accepting it would mean admitting that everything the Empire had believed about itself was wrong. 2 months later, the first joint human Imperial research station began construction in a neutral zone between their territories. It was a small beginning, but it marked the end of humanity's 10,000-year isolation and the beginning of a new era in galactic politics. Admiral Vextar stood on the observation deck of his new flagship, watching human and Imperial construction vessels work side by side. The sight still made him nervous, but he was beginning to appreciate the possibilities it represented. The galaxy was indeed becoming a much more interesting place. And somewhere in the depths of intergalactic space, ancient sensors detected the approach of entities that fed on stars themselves. The Void Hunters were returning, and the galaxy would need every advantage it could find to survive their hunger. Fortunately, humanity had spent 10,000 years preparing for exactly this kind of challenge. The real test was about to begin.